And we're live. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire. I'm the event coordinator at Village Books in Bellingham and Linden, Washington. We thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I have a couple of announcements and things about Crowdcast if you've never been on Crowdcast before. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a little green follow button. At some point, if you want to click on that, you will automatically be added to kind of a list that you'll get updates on when some of our events are going live. You can see our Crowdcast channel easily, see past events that are coming up. We always have events coming up. November is going to be a busy month, and we are excited about that. Speaking of which, on Tuesday at 7 p.m., that's November 10th, we are going to welcome Jim DeMaine. He is a doctor in the Seattle area. He has this book, Facing Death, Finding Dignity, Hope, and Healing at the End. He is going to be in conversation with his publisher, Greg Shaw, who started Clyde Hill Publishing. They're going to be in conversation together, and that's on Tuesday, November 10th at 7 p.m., so we hope you'll join us for that. We do have the chat disabled. There is a chat function. I'm going to bring the chat up for the Q&A portion of the event today. So if at any time during the event you feel like you want to ask a question, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's an Ask a Question feature. I encourage you at any time during the event when you're feeling so inspired and you're wondering about something, please click on Ask a Question. A little dialog box will pop up and you can type your question in there, and we'll just hold the questions there until we get to the Q&A. You can do that at any time. Nobody else can see that box pop up. It's not going to be distracting at all. So I encourage you, if you have questions throughout, please go ahead and use that Ask a Question feature. I do want to state that the virtual readings gallery is a safe space. Any user exhibiting offensive, hateful, or inappropriate behavior will be dismissed from the event immediately. Also, another important button on Crowdcast is this one located center screen right here. It's green. And it says, purchase the art of losing it here. If you click on that link, it takes you straight to the Village Books website where both of our authors' books are featured. We do have both books in stock at Village Books. And so today, if you hear something inspiring or something that piques your curiosity, or you just want to support a couple of authors and an independent bookstore, if you click on that link, it will take you straight to Village Books and the page where both books are listed. And the authors and Village Books would certainly appreciate it if you made a purchase today, because we are happily, our event programming is all free still at Village Books, but it is through book sales that we are able to continue the robust programming that we have. Okay, so now to the fun part. So a little bit about our moderator today. Terry Sue Harms has been a happy hairdresser and salon owner for over 40 years. She finds that her powers of observation and good communication skills have served both her work as a cosmetologist and as a writer. Plus, when it comes to studying the human condition, few places are better than the beauty shop. That is for sure. I think that anyone who works in a beauty shop is also a part psychologist. After a childhood of illiteracy, she taught herself to read and write as a young adult, one of her proudest and most rewarding accomplishments. She has self-published 2 books, Pearls My Mother Wore, a novel, and Reflections Upon the Occasion of My 85th Year, a memoir co-authored with her father-in-law. The Strongbox, Searching for My Absent Father, is her 3rd book. It's a brand new memoir published by She Writes Press. Terry Sue lives in scenic Sonoma, California with her husband. And our feature author today, Rosemary Keevil, has been a TV news reporter, a current affairs radio show host, and managing editor of a professional women's magazine. She has a master's degree in journalism and is currently a journalist covering addiction and recovery. Rosemary has 2 grown daughters with successful careers, and she lives in Whistler, British Columbia, just to the north of us over the border, with her partner and sheep-a-doodle. Rosemary has been clean and sober since 2002. She is here to present her memoir, The Art of Losing It, a memoir of grief and addiction. So join me with thunderous applause in your homes in welcoming Terry Sue Harms and Rosemary Keevil.
Terrific. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire.
Well, Rosemary, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I can't go any further without showing this book, the Strongbox. So we have my book, which Claire just showed you, and also a hard copy of this one right here, besides our excellent posters behind our heads.
Right on. Well, thank you for this opportunity to chat and get into the art of losing it. And thank you to Village Books for hosting us, sponsoring this event. It's really, the wave of the future. These virtual events are such a kick. I don't imagine that we would ever be together, you in one place, Rosemary, if it weren't for these virtual opportunities. So it's really great.
We should say where you are.
I'm in Sonoma, California. So it's beautiful here. It's sunny. I don't know if we're ever going to get rain, but we're hoping for rain. And they say it's on the horizon, that it should be arriving soon. But today is clear skies, beautiful, beautiful day here in Sonoma. And I guess you're cold up there in Whistler,
it's chilly.
Is that right?
It's chilly in Whistler, and Claire was saying it's chilly in Bellingham.
Well, let's go ahead and start talking a little bit about your book and writing the art of losing it. I was hoping that we could talk just a little bit about the writing process, because I think we memoirists are a little bit of a intriguing group, because we all have a life story, and how we get around to telling our life story is interesting to people. And so I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your decision to write this memoir. Did you ever think about fictionalizing it? Did you ever think about not writing it at all? What helped you jump into the memoir practice?
Well, I think when life happened, so much was happening. I never wasn't going to not write about it, because I'm a journalist. Doing a memoir as a journalist means talking about emotions. So that would be tough for a journalist, because I'm just used to talking about the facts, and certainly doing fiction would be making up facts. So that would be a real stretch. It's interesting. I was just looking at some old papers for some reason, and I ran across an email from Brooke Warner, and Brooke is the owner and publisher of She Writes Press, but she was also my content editor when I was writing the book. And I think this was an email that was sent to me after she read the first draft or some of the first draft of the book. And this was written in October of 2015. And she said, "I believe your background as a journalist gives you a disadvantage, because journalism is all about telling. It's about informing the reader of what happened. Memoir is the opposite. It's about evoking emotion." So I had my work cut out for me. The other challenge I had was I decided to put it in present tense, which is not an easy thing to do. But I really wanted to get the sense of urgency that I was going through during this time in my life. So I was sort of discouraged off of doing it in present tense, but I decided to do that, and I'm glad I did. It does make it difficult, because you cannot include the benefit of hindsight. So that was challenging now and again. But I don't think I was ever not going to write about it. I think that it was always going to be there in that fiction. I mean, maybe it's something that's fiction I might consider now, but I'd like to say that it's creative nonfiction.
Exactly. Well, that's so. I wondered about your journalism background, and if there were times when you felt like you were interviewing yourself.
Yes, yeah. Well, trying to get through all the facts and to get down to what when I did the radio show, it was a current affairs live drive time radio show. And then they switched formats and they went into emotional radio, which meant we had to talk about our emotions. So that was a little bit of a trial run for trying to be more open about my emotions and being open to maybe being judged. Heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid, exactly. Well, I was wondering also about, as I was reading the book, it's of course very, there's a load of trauma. Your husband and your brother are both dying at the beginning of the book, and so the gravity of the situation is quite clear. But at the same time, I was struck by a couple places where there was this amusing humor that would weave its way in. And I think for anybody who's ever, spent time just on the razor's edge of trauma knows that it teeters in this place of sort of absurd comedy. And so your use of humor as a buffer for some of the most painful parts. How intentional was that? Did that just come naturally? That was just your memory of how you actually experienced the events that you were going through, or in your writing craft, did you see it as a counterpoint that you wanted to implement in the text?
Well, I find a sense of humor is really, really important, and I do have a certain sense of irreverence. So, and it's a heavy topic. So I think I was aware of putting some levity into the situation. I was purposefully funny in some scenes, but when you and I were discussing this, it made me understand that some of it was just funny from the absurdity of it. And for example, when I'm talking about when the kids were going through all their stress, when I was going through all my stress, and their father was dying, and I read about how to help them, and I was told, I learned that they may actually indulge in some maladaptive behaviors. And I thought, oh my God, maladaptive, tell me about it. So I just want to go to this one paragraph about maladaptive behaviors. And this was not meant to be funny, and you might not necessarily laugh out loud, but there is certainly, it's certainly entertaining in terms of the absurdity. It often happens that Willow and Dixie have screaming outbursts simultaneously in stereo. So they were 2.5 and 5. This can happen at any time, or 4.5, day or night. And it sure as hell seems like a maladaptive behavior. But what the F am I supposed to do about it? On Thanksgiving, we're driving through heavy traffic to Aunt Janie's for dinner, and Dixie starts screaming. And then Willow starts screaming that she can't hear the music we're playing because Dixie is screaming. But bedtime is when the maladaptive behaviors become diabolical. So, I mean, that's not laugh out loud funny, but there's a certain thread in there that makes one smirk, especially if you can relate. So this wasn't purposeful, but maybe it's part of my irreverence coming through. I mean, the scene is just so pitiful that it's entertaining. So I'm glad that it came across that there is some levity in the situations that are really very serious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you really had your hands full, and they're grown women today. So I think writing when they're safely into their adulthood must have also given you permission to infuse a few of those just extreme situations that.
Well, there are scenes which I actually wrote about which I wanted to be funny, like the one where a boyfriend in high school coming to pick me up, at the house, and my father used to do links in the backyard pool. It sounds like we were well off. We weren't. We just happened to have this backyard pool, and he would do links in the pool with no clothes on. He was nude, but he wore a bathing cap. And so my father answered the door when Dwayne came to it with no clothes on and a bathing cap. So I mean, my parents were a little odd, I would say. Poor Dwayne. I mean, he's actually a friend today. He didn't bolt, so he must have really liked me. So I mean, I do try and put some humorous scenes in, but that was not a time when not necessarily anything that heavy was happening. Well, actually, it may have been heavy. There was most of the book is heavy, so. But the other times it's more, it just kind of is infused because of the nature of it, I believe.
Right on. Well, that's a very telling story. I think you come by your humor genetically for a father that would answer the door like that. He must have had a pretty quick wit.
Well, I have my oddness come by my oddness quite naturally.
Right on. Well, I was also struck in the book about how you live this very busy life. You keep your calendar packed pretty tight. And getting back to the idea of writing and writing structure, how did you find time, and what did you find a groove that you would write at a certain time in the day, or did you have some kind of actual sit down? How did, just getting the thing started is one thing, but finished is another on a book, and you went the distance. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your writing practice.
Well, back to my high school years again, my mother had by the way, we lived in a bit of a zoo. My father didn't want children or pets, and we ended up with, he ended up with 4 kids, 2 cats and 2 St. Bernards. And I was the youngest of the 4 kids, and my mother had a column she wrote for the Toronto Telegram, a syndic column, and she had to write it in the middle of the night because my father was sort of jealous of her time. So she'd get up at 3 or something, and I would get up and do my homework. I still remember studying my history and listening to Mom in the kitchen with her Olivetti typewriter, typing away her column, and I'm studying the Courrier de Bois, which was these traders who came to Canada from France. And this habit of writing in the night stuck with me. But to me, it's not in the night. I get up early. I get up like at 4, and sometimes when I'm writing, I'll get up at 3:30, and I'm very productive at this time of day. There's no distractions, and I can focus, and a night to process things. And then later on in the day, I would go to Starbucks, and Starbucks really worked for me because I cut my teeth TV news reporting. So I was really used to having a buzz of energy around me. So it was really helpful. I also, when I was at home by that time of day, I'd start doing laundry and doing the dishes. There was always something to tend to when I was out of my kind of focus first thing in the morning mode. So I'd go for a workout and have breakfast and then go to Starbucks. And occasionally someone I knew would come in. So that was actually good. It was like a little break from my writing. So between the middle of the night at home and Starbucks, Starbucks was pretty relevant. It's I have acknowledged that Starbucks in my book as grateful to them for being available to me to write. So I had to get in a groove, but then by the time 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock came around, I was toast. Couldn't do anything.
Yeah, that's a long stretch. Also, in your memoir, the chapter headings are all song titles, and I thought that was an interesting intro into the subject that you would be covering in any particular chapter. But I'm not super hip on music, so I wonder if you could tell me just a little bit about how you chose those songs. They don't always appear in the in the chapter. So they must have had some relevance for you. How did you make the decision to, one, use song titles and then choose the ones that you used?
Well, it was very choosing that as a way to title the chapters. It just came out of the blue. It's always been that way since I started working on it, and I'm not sure why. And once it was done, I realized that some of the titles of the chapters were a little bit random, and I thought, well, that was what struck me at the time. I'm just going to leave that. But some of them are quite obvious, like Visiting Day by Widespread Panic. First of all, I love the name of the group, but I used that song to title the chapter when my daughters, 13 and 15-year-old daughters, were visiting me in rehab. And Visiting Day was a big deal. The first time they'd seen me in a week. And one of them was basically revolting at the whole thing. So that one was quite appropriate. During Barry's illness, one of the albums which really resonated for us was Van Morrison's The Avalon Sunset. Many songs in that album were very appropriate. I'd love to write another song. Barry was a musician. He couldn't write songs or play his guitar because his fingers were numb because the cancer was in his brain. So it was obvious to use some of those. I used Whenever God Shines His Light, and also I'm Tired, Joey Boy. So as I said, some are random. How I came up with the idea is random, but what is not, another very random thing about it is my daughter, my younger daughter, she's 31, she's writing her own addiction memoir. And she actually has a New York agent interested in it. She's on a second draft or third draft. She's had some edits on it. Unbeknownst to me and her, she did the same thing.
Oh,
Isn't that bizarre?
Wonderful.
Yeah, like the kids
You
like
didn't
the
know. You two didn't compare notes? Fascinating.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, will you read drafts of her memoir, or she didn't read drafts of yours, or did she? Do you exchange?
But we have done some of that, but this was after we both decided the titles of the chapters were going to be songs.
Yeah.
Just out of the blue. So a lot of what the song titles has been random. but at the end of the day, when I looked at the titles of the chapters, well, I'll just go with it because that was what struck me at the time.
I like that. I feel like that's the meat of the matter, just we write from our experience and stay out of the way. Let the spirit sort of flow through us, and don't question why, just show up for the work.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
So I love that.
The spirit moved you.
Yeah. Well, last thing about the structure of the book and the process, the title that you've come up with, The Art of Losing It, somehow I got the impression that it was going to be a book about mastering loss. And in fact, as I read, I realized, oh no, this is mastering just unraveling and losing it. And
you didn't
so I
think
wonder
it was,
if you could.
You didn't think it was a diet book.
A how-to.
Well, I have to pull out another email. So a year ago, almost to the day of the publication date, which was October 6th, I received an email, October 15th, in, what date was this? In October 7th in 2019, I received an email from Brooke Warner again, the editor / publisher, and they were suggesting names for the book, titles for the book. And it had been called Rose Up until then. And she thought that sounded a little religious, and I wasn't married to the name at all. And I happened to be on a boat, the Tip Top 5, in the Galapagos with 2 other passengers and a guide and multitude of crew. I think the boat would carry about 12 passengers, but no one else was there yet. And, Joan and Colleen Wren and Doug, my partner, and I were the only passengers on the boat. It was terrific. We had a crew to ourselves and the guide to ourselves. And I got these suggestions from Brooke, and I just had this idea. Why don't I do a focus group with the guide and Colleen and Joan? Colleen lives in Oregon and Joan is down in California. And actually, Colleen worked on the 2010 Olympics here in British Columbia, so she had knowledge of the area. So some of the titles that Brooke came up were The Pile On, The Cause and Effect of Loss, Trauma Therapy, Broken Coping Mechanisms, The Art of Self-Medicating, Gasping for Air, Losing It. So I had this little focus group with Doug and Joan and Colleen, and somehow, I don't know who it wasn't me, came up with The Art of Losing It, combining some of these. And it, ding, 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 ding. I just loved it. There's a bit of irreverence to it. And when you think about losing it, this is what I was doing. I have to add, as an aside, our guide, Angelica, wasn't that helpful. She was very serious. I think it was just totally beyond her realm. She was very one-dimensional, know anything about plants. Like she knew about her plants and she knew about her animals in the Galapagos, but anything about addiction or death or grieving or loss, we cannot thank her for any input in the focus group. But I'd like to thank very much Joan and Colleen Wren for being part of that title, because I love it. And then, of course, when you think about it, I lost my husband, I lost my brother, and I lost myself to the addiction. I did not lose my life, which I was very lucky for, because addicts and alcoholics can lose their lives. So I love the question because I love the answer.
Fantastic. Well, to that point of losing yourself, it was going more into the content of the memoir. You were, to me, trying to be everything to everybody. I think it sort of takes one to know one. I suffer the same kind of hero complex. I want to be everybody's hero, and so you were, juggling these medical, horrific weighty medical conditions for both your husband and your brother. But you were also, trying to be a nurturing mother, a concerned sister to your brother, a considerate daughter, and a career woman. And so at one point early on in the book, you're flying from one hospital to another and trying to find doctors and doctors' offices and consultants and going through these hallways. And at some point you get completely turned around and you kind of, plead to whoever will hear me, where the hell am I? And that really jumped off the page for me because I could so relate to it personally. Like, so often when I get swept up in that, trying to be everything to everybody, I get lost in the process. And it's like, where the hell is Terry? And so I could really hear that, it was like almost an unconscious plea, like, Rosemary, Rosemary knocking. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, that how caregivers will put themselves on the back burner and put the needs of others in front of their own needs.
That's an interesting insight into that. I think I was just asking a stranger in the hallway, instead of being polite, could you please tell me this, that, the other thing? I just said to them, where the hell am I? But it was absolutely representative of where the hell am I, really, in a more existential sense. So I had one doctor tell me I was in crisis mode. So really, I was just going from crisis to crisis, and I was just really in survival mode. I was just dealing with the next crisis. So I don't know, I didn't really have self-care time. I certainly wasn't aware, as I am today, that self-care is important. I had a long time learning that through sobriety, etc. How I dealt with it was I would have timed breakdowns. Like I remember one time, another time, Barry was admitted to the hospital, and he's in this bed in this room with 3 other men, and they're coughing and barfing and crying and diarrhea, and poor Barry looks at me. He doesn't need to say anything. He's just got this desperate look in his eyes. He says, which just says, please get me a private room. So I think I'm on my way to see my brother, but I need to deal with this this certain mission right now, is to get him a different room. And I'm going towards the elevator, and I see this telephone, this pay telephone. It was in 91. And I think I'll just call my sister. I don't know what I was thinking, the last thing I had time for. And I said, wait, what you doing? And she said, well, we're having a dinner party. And I just thought, oh gosh, if I could do something that normal. And I started to bawl. And then I realized, no, I don't have time for this. No, I'll have to shelve this and do it later. So, and that would often be at bedtime, if it ever came that there was actually quiet in the house, I would then time my breakdown. At one point, I was at the end of the family room, hidden in this little nook, and Barry came over, and he was in bed, had been in bed, and I was having a ball crying, and he said, "Is this just a general breakdown, or is something in specifically bothering you?" And he says, "I need you in bed." So it wasn't a good time for a breakdown, but I did reserve time for a breakdown. And then I would also, I was not drinking alcoholically during this time, but if things did quiet down at bedtime and I was alone in the kitchen, I would have a glass of wine. And I mean, obviously, eventually it grew to more than one glass. The other thing that I did actually fit in was exercise, and I was actually able to make that a priority. I recall the weekend that Barry had to come home because he wanted to die at home, and we knew he was dying. Was on a Friday. That week, I was lying beside him in the hospital room. We were watching Seinfeld on the little TV, and I guess we had just turned it off, and he says to me, "Grandfather's waiting." This was on a Wednesday, he died on Sunday. And so right then I knew that he knew he was dying, and I knew he was dying, and he didn't want to die in the hospital. So I had a meeting with the oncologist, and I said, he's dying. We know it. And because they couldn't figure out at the end they couldn't find the cancer. So he had to rely on my gut and Barry's gut that we knew he was dying. He said, okay, we'll do some final tests, and we'll make arrangements for him to get home. And then on the Friday, they found that they did find the cancer cells in him finally. And so we made arrangements for him to come home, but there's a lot to be done when someone's dying coming home. I mean, I had to get the morphine, which you don't get at a regular pharmacy. I had to get other had to organize a nurse, had to get other meds. We didn't know when he would die, so I had a wheelchair and commode and things like that. I had a lot to get done, and I was sort of assigning things to a sister-in-law and my mother. But before I did that on the Saturday morning, I thought, okay, I need to go for a run. So I went for a run, and then I built up the stamina, the courage, the fortitude to do it all. So I found the exercise was pretty relevant for me. Mm-hmm. And that would have been my extent of my self-care. I actually made that a priority.
Mm-hmm. I also noticed how you would have these kind of prayers on the go, these dash off, God help me. And they show up in the book in italics, and I loved that they got italicized. And so I was wondering how, were those just prayers of desperation, or do you have a spiritual path that you go through on, or a spiritual belief, something that, how did those little mini prayers on the run work their way into your life?
The desperation. Well, I do have a belief in a higher power, and I will actually attribute that to my mother again. She wasn't particularly religious, and I am not religious, but she would go into the woods and commune with God. And my higher power happens to be called God, but it doesn't have to be. And it's been useful for me in the AA program that I believed in a higher power, because you kind of need to do that, need to know that you're not completely alone. And so these were just these prayers on the run. God, please help me. God, please help Perry. They were sort of desperation. But at one point I did have a direct line to God. And that was when I had hit my bottom. I'd driven in the kids drunk and high, and I blacked out. I'd driven the kids drunk and high before, and I'd blacked out before, but never at the same time. And I didn't have an accident, and it was a gift of desperation, because this was my bottom. I had finally hit my bottom, and I was going the next day to meet with or a few days later, to meet with a friend of mine for lunch, for her birthday lunch. And on the way to the lunch, I passed by Christ Church Cathedral in downtown Vancouver, and I pulled over and I went in, and I sat in the pews. And I mean, it was middle of a Wednesday afternoon, so there was nobody there. And I prayed. I said, God, please be in me. Please be in me. I prayed it with the sincerity and the depth, any depth of emotion I could find within myself, deep in myself. Said, please be in me. And then I went for lunch. I was so hungover I could hardly sign the birthday card for Cynthia. Actually, her name was Monica. Her name was Cynthia, but I called her Monica in the book. Anyway, she comes. She's a little bit late. She says, "I'm sorry, I'm late, and my makeup is smeared. I was just crying in the basement of Christ Church Cathedral." I said, "You were? I've just been praying in the nave of Christ Church Cathedral." She had just been with her spiritual counselor, and she had a spiritual counselor. I thought, well, maybe I should see a spiritual counselor. Maybe that would help me. So I booked an appointment with a spiritual counselor, and I told the spiritual counselor what I had done. I confessed. I was gushing with tears, and I confessed what I had done. And after that had all come out, I said to her, do you think I need a spiritual retreat? And Sheena looks at me with her divine blue eyes and probing but kind, and she said, "Rosemary, what about rehab?" You think? So I went from God, please be in me, in the church, in the nave of the church, to the basement of the church within a matter of days, getting my directive, which was get clean and sober, lady. So the prayers ultimately worked.
Right on, right on. Well, it must have been difficult as a mother, filled with guilt from the past, to make that decision to go into rehab. And I wonder if you'd like to say a little bit more about how that was for you to put the life you've been living down and go into this vast unknown of rehab and what the future might hold, and give yourself permission to kind of put this, put the seatbelt on before your kid, or the oxygen mask, or whatever that metaphor is about. Yeah. That's, as a mother, that's just so
Yeah.
painful.
It is painful. And the thought of going to rehab in itself, meaning I had to stop drinking and drugging, which I went to acceptance of that I had to stop, and this is why I was going to rehab. But I had a hard time with actually leaving the girls, and I had unhealthy codependency with them, very unhealthy. And I just didn't know how I was possibly going to leave them for 28 days. They wouldn't be okay. And I was talking to the head therapist at the rehab center that I was going to, and I said, I don't know how I can leave the kids. I don't know how to tell them that I'm going to leave them. And he said, "You're no good to them sick. You're no good to them sick." I thought, yeah, how will they be without me? And then when I was in the rehab, and after 2 or 3 days, I had this tremendous separation anxiety. It was so physical. It was like grieving. Grieving is a very physical, nauseating experience. And this is how I felt. My kids are not going to be okay. I was consumed by it. And in group therapy the next day, I said to the group and to Graham, who was the head therapist, I'm leaving. I can't leave. I'm leaving rehab because I got to go see the kids. They need me. And Graham looks at me and he says, "If you leave, Rosemary, you will drink." And by this point, I was so desperate to not ever drink again that landed. Mm-hmm. And I needed to stay for the sake of the kids.
Wow.
Well, it's for me, but I needed to stay for them. So, I had an unhealthy dependency on the kids, and that was almost as hard as quitting drinking and using was actually leaving them for 28 days. It's tough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult.
Well, and were they relieved to see you come home a sober woman?
You'd think.
Or was it like, okay, now she's actually tracking, we can't get away with eating, cookies for dinner, or whatever little kids do to just be just devilish?
That's not too far off. Well, by this point, they were 13 and 15. And they had known that there was something was obviously amiss. I was not normal. I was doing a lot of very abnormal, crazy things. And the dots weren't really that connected until I got sober and fessed up to everything to them. But it was like a wrench thrown into our family system. The family systems theory would say that we were functioning when I was drinking and using as a dysfunctional equilibrium. And that doesn't mean that it wasn't chaotic, just because it was an equilibrium doesn't mean it wasn't chaotic. It was just that within the chaos, the different family members' behaviors were predictable. You throw sobriety into that, and all of a sudden I'm unpredictable. I have rules. Can you imagine? I had a curfew. What's that? And at one point, one of them said, "I just wish you never got sober." It was that bad for them, because I suddenly had these rules. Because I'm supposed to have rules. You can't have 6 candies at the store. You can only have 2. Or there's a curfew. You got to be home at 5. Totally arbitrary. I must admit. So as good a thing as it was for them, for everybody, that I was clean and sober, it was tough. It was a real adjustment. We had to peel away all these layers of dysfunction, and I mean, I'm still a work in progress, but it took a while to get a bit of a healthier equilibrium rather than a completely dysfunctional equilibrium. So it was not easy for anybody.
And did you ever go through grief counseling as a family, like specific? One thing about family dynamic and just household running of the household, but any family counseling around grief, or did you each handle grieving of the loss, of their father, your husband, separately?
Well, we did a lot of we did family therapy when I was getting sober, and the grief would have seeped into that as family therapy, and the three of us have also had a lot of their own individual therapy. And when their father had died, I had done a fair bit of research on how to help them through the grieving, but they were 3 and 5 at that time. So that I learned that they needed to have that any caregivers or teachers or family members needed to know that to try to draw them out, to get them to talk, to get them to do art, and that get them to talk about their daddy a lot. I just learned ways to help them through it. God knows I wasn't necessarily that good at it, but I also learned that the different ages will handle and filter or understand death and finality in different ways. And so the 3-year-old, I remember being in the grocery store, and the stranger beside me, beside the beans, the 3-year-old was with me, and she looks up at the stranger and says, "It's my birthday and my daddy's dead, dead, dead." I mean, what do you do with that? At the same time, the 5-year-old says to me one day, "Mommy, who do I tell that daddy's died?" So I had to learn about the grieving process for myself and for them, and I was not necessarily that good at it. And for me personally, I probably didn't really go through it until I got sober.
Well, I have to say, just hearing you tell that story, it really brings up kind of a upwelling of emotion for me, because it's so beautiful that even in this, unraveling family dynamic, that you had 2 girls that could be so frank with their words, so unfiltered with their words. It's really actually a very beautiful thing, and I'm sorry for all of their grief and struggle, but that really is a gift that you gave to your daughters, that you didn't tell them to shut up or leave you alone or don't talk about it. So often grief ends up getting parked in some dark place and never to be visited again, and you don't even say that person's name. And so
I'd read a lot. I was at a bookstore and I bought so many books on death and grieving that the checkout woman said to me, "Do you work in a palliative care unit?"
Good.
Do you have a minute?
Right on. Well, I wonder if Claire wants to bring in any questions or comments from the group. We've just got a few minutes left.
Wow, I have been so enjoying this from behind the curtain. What a story, Rosemary. I am going to bring up the chat. So those of you who are in the audience, feel free to, we can't see you, but you can, in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, it says, say something nice. You can type in that little bar there, and you can ask questions, you can give feedback, and we certainly encourage that. You can just say hello. But in the meantime, some things that I really that really struck me that I appreciate. First of all, I think it's incredible that both you and your daughter formatted your books the same way with the chapter titles. That's really something.
I know. It's just unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And best of luck to her on her book and getting that going. I was also struck by that you said you were able to time your breakdowns. A lot of people don't have that that ability, and I think that's great that you were able to do that.
Well, that goes under the no choice category.
Yes, but then you also were able to, like you say, find time for running.
Yes.
So I sense in you a real strength as far as you. It sounds like you're able to do what needs to be done at the time, or did what needed to be done at the time, and I mean, as with running, there's something so almost transcendent about running. You know, if anyone is a runner, they know that that kind of other place that you're able to go.
There's a zen.
Mm-hmm.
Same with swimming for me. Same with swimming for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that through it all you were able to still have time for that.
Or to make the time, yeah. It was.
Yes. That must have been so hard to make the time for that.
Well, yes, as I said, I mean, Barry was dying and coming home, and somehow I must have known I had time to do this, because he was dying. He could have died at any time, but something in my gut must have, or that I knew I couldn't do it unless I did run. I knew I couldn't face what needed to be done unless I had some strength from the Zen experience of running. Yeah. Yeah. Or so it was just another level working there, because he could have died when I was running, but I must have known that I had enough time, and I wouldn't be able to do it without it.
Wow.
Yeah, you have to put fuel in the tank to get to the other end, you know, and if that helps put fuel in your tank. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, do you see in the chat, Joan Wren is saying that you were that she was one of the people on the cruise. Oh. Someone who went through such hard times emerged as such a fun person to share a cruise with.
Thank you, Joan and Colleen. I wouldn't have had such a great title without you. I'm sorry you're not in my acknowledgments, but my acknowledgments were very short. So
I do love the title too, The Art of Losing It. I appreciate the sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of.
I love the irreverence of it. It just suits me to a T. Yeah. It was fun coming up with it. We had a fun focus group despite Angelica's lack of participation.
Have you had any pushback from anybody that, sometimes with memoir writing, somebody will, oh, you didn't put enough of me in the book, or you put too much of me in the book, or all of that comes into that whole memoir dynamic. They see you as an individual. They don't see you as a writer. Any stories for that?
Well, I was a bit concerned about that. I changed everybody's name, but that's kind of a thin disguise, especially if you're that person. And I haven't had any bad feedback from that yet. But people kind of play on it and think it's sort of fun. My sister and brother-in-law, who I call Hal and Sal in the book, and that's not their names. I mean, I talk about them in the book, and they're probably okay with it, because after my launch, they he sent me some flowers and congratulations, and it says Hal and Sal and family. So who are Hal and Sal? But I haven't. I have been aware of that and concerned about that. Like some sister-in-laws and brother-in-law on the other side, or Barry's family. I refer to them at times in certain scenes, and I didn't use their names. They know who they are. So I'm kind of just hoping that I'll get by without any of this negative feedback. So far, so good. Mm-hmm. But it's something certainly I was aware of when writing it.
I think that would be true of just about any memoir. I wonder that I always wonder that about authors of memoirs. And I was hoping, Terry, could you tell us a little bit about the Strongbox, please?
I have to say, I've read it and it's unbelievable. It's like it's true life mystery. It's just amazing. Wow. I meant to say that at the beginning. Congratulations to you. It's just, what a read. Well, I can't believe it's true.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, so it's the Strongbox, searching for my absent father. It's a 40-year hunt that I was on to identify my biological father after my mother died suddenly when I was 16. And leaving me with a hostile stepfather who never hesitated to refer to me as a bastard. So I didn't know who my father was, but I knew it wasn't him. And my mother had this portable metal file box that she kept both her important papers, but also this random bits of ephemera from her past. And it took over 4 decades for me to really put the pieces together and understand the nature of the relationship she had with my father. And so I went from being this rejected child to having the life that I live today is really just a very charmed, blessed. It's like I dealt with all of my karmic heaviness in childhood, and since my mother's death, my life has just gotten better and better and better. And I wanted to tell the story about coming out of a life of trauma, a childhood of pretty significant trauma, and not going down the drain. Recovery is also a part of my story. So actually, Halloween, I celebrated 33 years of recovery. And so that's a big part of the survival. But I really wanted to tell a story, explain how could I go from being this functionally illiterate kid, I didn't read my first book until I was in my 20s, to being the woman who I am today. I have a bachelor's degree in English from Mills College, which is a beautiful college in Oakland, California. It's no slouch school. It took me 11 years to get the bachelor's degree. I started in remedial English classes, but I did get it. And then not only doing that, but going on to writing books, which was really the 180 from that childhood. And so I think if there's ever a word that gets attached to the Strongbox, it's that it's inspiring. And that's so wonderful for me. So it's out in the world now. And I feel like so many of us who do function well in society, but actually have these childhood, pasts that are steeped in secrecy and shame, and that it's a remarkable time right now for my book to be coming out, because so many of us are no longer carrying the dead weight of the shame from the past. And so this is just an example of breaking silence, claiming self, moving forward in a healthy, loving way. And so I'm really thrilled that it's just remarkable. All these that it's coming out right now really floats my boat.
You're a darn good sleuth as well. figuring out who your father was.
I'm tenacious, that's for sure.
Wow. Well, congratulations to you both
Thank you.
on your books. Neither of you, it sounds like, has had an easy journey. I guess most people's journeys aren't easy, but some of us are placed with this particular challenges. And you're both very inspiring to listen to, and I'm grateful that I got to host your event today.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's been fun, and thank you very much, Terry.
Thank you, Rosemary, and thanks to Village Books and Paper Dreams.
Yes,
I love that.
Books and Paper Dreams. That's right. That's our Paper Dreams is our sister gift store. So, so just as a reminder to folks that green button center screen, Purchase the Art of Losing It Here, is a link directly to the Village Books website where both of these books can be purchased. We have both books in stock. If you're watching this on YouTube, in the description, there's a link straight to the Village Books website. And I want to thank everyone who watched today. And ladies, do you have any parting words?
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Much gratitude.
All right. Well, with that, we will say goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. And thank you for the gang for coming, Joan and